The blue screen of death mocked Rebecca Chun from every monitor in the conference room. 27 screens displaying the same devastating message, while 12 of the most important investors in Chicago sat around the mahogany table. Their expressions shifting from confusion to concern to barely concealed panic. The presentation that would determine whether TechFlow Innovation survived another quarter had crashed spectacularly, taking with it months of preparation and possibly her entire career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca's hands trembled as she pressed the power button for the third time, watching the familiar logo flicker and die again. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the subtle buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant hum of traffic 30 floors below. She could feel sweat gathering at the base of her neck, despite the aggressive air conditioning that kept the Millennium Business Tower at a constant 68 degrees. "Perhaps we should reschedule," suggested Harrison Mills, the lead investor, whose portfolio could make or break startup companies with a single phone call. His tone carried the kind of polite dismissal that Rebecca had learned to fear more than outright rejection. Technical difficulties happen to everyone, but they both knew this wasn't just a technical difficulty. This was a catastrophe that would ripple through every aspect of TechFlow's future. The quarterly numbers that should have been showcasing their revolutionary customer management software were trapped behind a wall of corrupted code that had somehow infected every device in the building. Rebecca's mind raced through possibilities, each one leading to the same devastating conclusion. Someone had sabotaged her presentation. "Give me 5 minutes," Rebecca heard herself saying, though she had no idea how to deliver on that promise. "I can fix this." The skeptical glances exchanged around the table told her everything she needed to know about their confidence in her technical abilities. Rebecca Chun might have graduated summa cum laude from MIT with degrees in both computer science and business administration. But in this room full of silver-haired men who remembered when she was still fetching coffee for senior developers, she would always be the young woman who had somehow stumbled into a position of authority. Marcus Thompson, her assistant and the closest thing she had to an ally in the company, appeared at her shoulder with his laptop already open. His fingers flew across the keyboard with the desperate efficiency of someone whose job security was directly tied to hers. "The entire network is compromised," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the increasingly restless murmur of conversation from the investors. "Whatever hit us, it's not responding to any of our standard protocols." Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of every decision that had led her to this moment. She had sacrificed everything to build TechFlow from a 2-person startup operating out of her graduate school apartment into a company that employed over 200 people and generated enough revenue to attract the attention of venture capitalists and corporate raiders alike. She had worked 18-hour days for 5 years, had missed family gatherings and postponed relationships, and turned down job offers from established tech giants because she believed in what they were building. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very technology she had devoted her life to perfecting was now betraying her in front of the people whose approval could transform TechFlow from a promising startup into a major player in the software industry. Every line of code she had written, every late night spent debugging impossible problems, every weekend sacrificed to meet impossible deadlines had led to this moment where her expertise felt utterly useless. "Rebecca." The voice came from Tom Rodriguez, her head of IT, who had appeared in the doorway with an expression that somehow managed to convey both panic and resignation. "We've tried everything. The backup servers are down, the cloud storage is inaccessible, and the security protocols are treating our own access codes as hostile intrusion attempts. It's like the system is actively fighting us." Rebecca had always prided herself on being prepared for any crisis that could threaten her company. But she had never imagined that her downfall would come from the very foundation of everything she had built. TechFlow Innovations occupied 3 floors of the Millennium Business Tower, its glass offices and open workspaces designed to foster the kind of collaborative creativity that had made Silicon Valley famous. But tonight, those carefully planned spaces felt like a prison where every screen displayed evidence of her failure. The presentation she had spent 6 months preparing was supposed to demonstrate TechFlow's latest breakthrough in artificial intelligence integration, a customer service platform that could revolutionize how companies interacted with their clients. The software could predict customer needs, resolve complaints before they escalated, and generate personalized solutions that traditional customer service representatives could never match. It was the kind of innovation that could establish TechFlow as a leader in the rapidly evolving tech industry. But more than that, tonight's presentation represented validation for every risk Rebecca had taken since founding the company. She had been 28 when she walked away from a secure position at a Fortune 500 technology firm to pursue her vision of creating software that could genuinely improve people's lives. Her parents, immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give their daughter opportunities they never had, couldn't understand why she would abandon stability for uncertainty. Her mother still called every Sunday to ask when Rebecca was going to find a nice stable job with benefits and regular hours. Her father, who had worked double shifts at a manufacturing plant to pay for her education, couldn't comprehend why she would choose the stress of entrepreneurship over the security of corporate employment. They loved her and supported her, but they worried constantly about her future in an industry that seemed to thrive on instability and constant change. Rebecca understood their concerns because she shared them every time she looked at TechFlow's financial projections or received rejection letters from potential investors who couldn't see the value in what her team was creating. The tech industry was notorious for its treatment of female entrepreneurs, and Rebecca had experienced firsthand the subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination that made every business meeting feel like a battle to prove her competence. She had learned to speak louder in meetings to be heard over male colleagues who assumed her ideas were less valuable. She had perfected the art of presenting complex technical concepts in language that wouldn't threaten men who preferred to believe that women were naturally less capable of understanding sophisticated programming. She had developed thick skin to protect herself from the comments about her appearance, her age, her accent, and her right to occupy space in boardrooms where women were still treated as novelties rather than equals. The success of tonight's presentation would prove that all those struggles had been worthwhile. The artificial intelligence platform they had developed represented genuine innovation that could transform how businesses operated. But failure would confirm every skeptical comment and dismissive gesture she had endured throughout her career. It would validate the investors who had suggested she might be better suited for marketing or human resources roles rather than technical leadership. Standing in the conference room surrounded by the wreckage of her carefully planned presentation, Rebecca felt the familiar weight of imposter syndrome settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Despite her degrees and her achievements and the respect of her employees, part of her had always wondered if she truly belonged in this world of venture capital and corporate competition. Tonight's disaster felt like confirmation that she had been pretending to be something she wasn't. The investors were beginning to gather their materials and check their phones, the universal signal that they considered the meeting effectively over. Rebecca could see their attention shifting from polite interest to barely concealed impatience. They had other opportunities to explore, other entrepreneurs to evaluate, other ways to spend their money that didn't involve watching a young CEO struggle with basic technical problems. Perhaps, Harrison Mills said with the kind of diplomatic tone that preceded devastating rejections, we should table this discussion until you've resolved your infrastructure issues. Technology companies need to demonstrate that they can manage their own systems before we can trust them with our investment. The comment stung because it was absolutely fair. A software company that couldn't keep its own computers functioning had no business asking for millions of dollars to expand operations. Rebecca had built TechFlow's reputation on reliability and innovation, but tonight she looked like an amateur who had been overwhelmed by problems that professional IT departments handled routinely. Marcus was still typing frantically on his laptop, his face illuminated by the blue glow of error messages that seemed to multiply faster than he could address them. Sweat had begun to bead on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning, and Rebecca could see the panic in his eyes as each attempted solution failed to restore their systems. Tom Rodriguez reappeared in the doorway, this time accompanied by two other members of the IT team, whose expressions suggested they had exhausted their options. "We're locked out of everything," he announced with the defeated tone of someone admitting professional failure. "The security protocols are treating our administrative access as unauthorized intrusion attempts. It's like the system doesn't recognize us anymore." Rebecca felt her chest tighten as the full implications of their situation became clear. They weren't just dealing with a software glitch or a temporary network failure. Someone had systematically compromised every aspect of TechFlow's digital infrastructure, turning their own security measures against them. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone had known about tonight's presentation and had deliberately sabotaged it. Her mind immediately went to Lisa Park, the board member who had been vocal about her concerns regarding Rebecca's leadership style and strategic vision. Lisa had the technical knowledge and the access credentials necessary to orchestrate this kind of attack, and she had made no secret of her belief that TechFlow needed more experienced leadership to reach its full potential. But accusing a board member of sabotage without concrete evidence would destroy what remained of Rebecca's credibility. The alternative was accepting that TechFlow's security measures had been inadequate to protect against external threats, which raised equally troubling questions about the company's ability to safeguard client data and proprietary information. Either way, tonight's disaster would have consequences that extended far beyond a failed presentation. Rebecca looked around the conference room at the faces of people whose decisions would determine her company's future, and she realized that everything she had worked for was slipping away one frozen screen at a time. The artificial intelligence platform that was supposed to revolutionize customer service would never get the chance to prove its value. The employees who had believed in her vision would lose their jobs. The investors who had shown interest in TechFlow's potential would redirect their attention to less problematic opportunities. But as she stood there watching her dreams disintegrate, Rebecca heard something that changed everything. The soft sound of a maintenance cart rolling down the hallway outside the conference room, its wheels squeaking slightly on the polished marble floor. It was such an ordinary sound, so completely disconnected from the crisis unfolding in the room, that it reminded her of a world beyond venture capital and quarterly projections, and the endless pressure to prove herself worthy of success. Someone was out there, quietly doing the work that kept the building functioning, while she struggled with problems that felt monumentally important, but were really just sophisticated versions of things that broke and needed to be fixed. And for the first time since the screens had gone blue, Rebecca felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to save everything she had built. The maintenance cart stopped just outside the conference room, and through the glass walls, Rebecca could see a man in a navy blue uniform examining the cleaning schedule clipped to his cart. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, with graying hair at his temples and the kind of weathered hands that spoke of years spent working with tools and equipment. What struck her most was his complete composure in the face of the chaos that had consumed everyone else in the building. While her IT team frantically tried to restore systems and her investors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, this janitor moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who understood that most problems had solutions if you approached them methodically. He glanced through the glass at the frozen screens and the cluster of frustrated people, then quietly knocked on the doorframe. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that Rebecca couldn't immediately place. "I'm David Martinez from Building Maintenance." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I couldn't help but notice you're having some computer troubles." The suggestion implicit in his presence was so unexpected that the entire room fell silent. Rebecca found herself studying his face, noting the intelligence in his dark eyes and the way he held himself with quiet dignity, despite the dismissive looks he was receiving from several of the investors. There was something about his demeanor that suggested he was offering help rather than simply being polite. "We're dealing with a sophisticated network intrusion," Tom Rodriguez said with the kind of professional courtesy that barely concealed his irritation at the interruption. "I don't think there's anything maintenance can do about corrupted software protocols." David nodded thoughtfully, as if he had expected that response. "Mind if I take a look? Sometimes these things are simpler than they seem." The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything Rebecca thought she knew about expertise and authority. Every instinct she had developed during her years in the tech industry told her that a janitor couldn't possibly understand the complexities of enterprise software management. But those same instincts had failed her tonight, leaving her standing in front of a room full of increasingly skeptical investors with no solutions and rapidly diminishing credibility. Harrison Mills cleared his throat with the kind of diplomatic precision that preceded polite dismissals. "I think we should let the professionals handle this technical issue. Perhaps we can reconvene when your systems are operational." But Rebecca found herself looking more closely at David Martinez, noticing details that didn't quite fit her assumptions about building maintenance workers. His uniform was clean and pressed, but his shoes were expensive leather rather than the practical work boots she would have expected. His hands, while obviously familiar with manual labor, had the careful precision of someone accustomed to delicate work. Most telling was the way he looked at the frozen screens, with recognition rather than confusion. "What kind of computer troubles are you having exactly?" David asked, directing his question to Rebecca rather than to the IT staff who had been struggling with the problem for the past hour. Rebecca hesitated, aware that explaining their situation to a janitor would seem bizarre to everyone in the room. But something about David's calm presence and direct gaze made her want to treat him as seriously as he was treating their crisis. "Our entire network has been compromised. Every computer in the building is locked down by what appears to be sophisticated security breach that's treating our own administrative access as unauthorized intrusion attempts." David nodded as if this diagnosis made perfect sense to him. "And your IT team has tried the standard recovery protocols without success?" The fact that he knew there were standard recovery protocols surprised everyone in the room, including Tom Rodriguez, who looked at David with new interest. "We've attempted everything in our emergency response manual. The system is actively resisting our attempts to regain control. May I?" David gestured toward the laptop that Marcus had been using, his request so polite and unassuming that Marcus handed it over before anyone could object. Rebecca watched as David's fingers moved across the keyboard with the kind of fluid confidence that came from years of experience with complex systems. He wasn't hunting and pecking or squinting at the screen like someone unfamiliar with computers. His movements were precise and purposeful, suggesting a level of technical knowledge that seemed impossible given his current occupation. Within 30 seconds, David had navigated to diagnostic screens that Rebecca hadn't even known existed. His eyes scanned lines of code with the speed of someone who could read programming languages as easily as English. The concentration on his face was absolute, blocking out the whispered conversations and shifting chairs around the conference table. "Interesting," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. "This isn't a security breach at all. Someone has activated a dormant testing protocol that's designed to simulate Intrusion attempts for security training purposes. The system thinks it's running a drill, which is why it's rejecting legitimate access credentials. The explanation was so unexpected that Rebecca felt her understanding of the situation shift completely. Not sabotage, but a mice-activated training program that had spiraled out of control. It was the kind of mistake that could happen to any company, but it required someone with deep knowledge of security systems to recognize and resolve. David's fingers continued moving across the keyboard, navigating through system menus with the ease of someone who had designed them rather than simply learned to use them. The protocol was probably triggered accidentally during routine maintenance, but it's running with administrative privileges that make it nearly impossible to disable through normal channels. Can you fix it? Rebecca asked, aware that her question acknowledged David's expertise in a way that would have seemed impossible just minutes earlier. Should be able to, David replied without looking up from the screen. Just need to access the master control panel and reset the security parameters to their default configuration. The casual confidence in his voice was more reassuring than all of Tom Rodriguez's technical explanations and emergency protocols. Rebecca found herself holding her breath as David worked, aware that the next few minutes would determine whether her presentation could be salvaged or whether TechFlow would lose the investment opportunity that could secure its future. Around the conference table, the investors had stopped their restless shifting and begun paying attention to the unexpected drama unfolding before them. Even Harrison Mills had put away his phone and was watching David work with the kind of focused interest that successful businessmen reserve for genuinely surprising developments. "There," David said, his voice carrying quiet satisfaction as screens throughout the conference room flickered and began displaying the TechFlow logo that Rebecca had designed during the company's earliest days. "Your presentation should be accessible now." The transformation was immediate and complete. Every monitor that had been frozen with error messages now showed the carefully prepared slides that demonstrated TechFlow's artificial intelligence platform. Charts and graphs that had been trapped behind corrupted security protocols reappeared with perfect clarity, displaying months of development work and testing results that validated everything Rebecca had been trying to tell the investors. The relief that flooded through her was so intense that she felt dizzy for a moment, gripping the edge of the conference table to steady herself. Her presentation was saved, her company's future was back on track, and the investors who had been preparing to leave were now leaning forward in their chairs with renewed interest. But more than the technical rescue, Rebecca was struck by the realization that David Martinez had solved in 2 minutes a problem that had defeated her entire IT department. His expertise was clearly far beyond what anyone would expect from a building maintenance worker, raising questions about his background that she couldn't ignore. "How did you know how to do that?" she asked, her curiosity overriding the professional distance that usually separated executives from service staff. David smiled with the kind of quiet warmth that suggested he was accustomed to surprising people with his capabilities. "I used to work in software development before I took this job. Sometimes the old skills come in handy." The understatement was so profound that Rebecca almost laughed. Software development experience didn't automatically translate to the kind of deep systems knowledge that David had just demonstrated. He had navigated through security, protocols, and administrative controls with the expertise of someone who had spent years working at the highest levels of network management. "What kind of software development?" she pressed, aware that her interest was probably inappropriate, but unable to suppress her curiosity about the man who had just saved her career. "Database management and security systems mostly," David replied with the kind of casual tone that people used when discussing mundane topics rather than highly specialized technical fields. "Nothing as sophisticated as what you're working on here." Again, the modesty seemed misplaced given what Rebecca had just witnessed. Database management and security systems were among the most complex and challenging areas of software development, requiring years of training and experience to master. The fact that David was working as a janitor despite possessing those skills suggested a story that was far more complicated than his uniform indicated. Marcus had reclaimed his laptop and was frantically pulling up the presentation materials, his relief evident as each slide loaded perfectly. The artificial intelligence demonstrations that had been trapped behind the security malfunction were now displaying flawlessly, showing the elegant interface and powerful capabilities that TechFlow had spent years developing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rebecca announced to the investors, her confidence returning as she realized that her presentation could proceed as planned. "If you're ready, I'd like to show you exactly why TechFlow represents the future of customer service technology." But even as she prepared to launch into the presentation that would determine her company's future, Rebecca found her attention drawn back to David Martinez, who was quietly preparing to leave the conference room. There was something about his presence that had changed the entire dynamic of the evening, not just through his technical intervention, but through the reminder that expertise and value could be found in unexpected places. David had solved their crisis with the kind of calm competence that Rebecca associated with the most skilled engineers she had ever worked with. But he wore a janitor's uniform and carried himself with the humble dignity of someone who had learned not to call attention to his capabilities. The contradiction was fascinating and troubling in equal measure, suggesting possibilities about talent and opportunity that challenged assumptions Rebecca hadn't even realized she held. As David reached the doorway, he paused and looked back at Rebecca with an expression that seemed to carry both encouragement and understanding. "Good luck with your presentation," he said simply, and then he was gone, his maintenance cart squeaking slightly as he continued down the hallway to whatever other tasks awaited him in the building. Rebecca turned back to face the investors, her presentation materials finally accessible and her confidence restored. But part of her mind remained focused on the man who had appeared at exactly the right moment with exactly the right skills to save everything she had worked to build. She couldn't shake the feeling that David Martinez was far more than he appeared to be, and that their brief encounter had revealed something important about both of them that she didn't yet understand. The presentation that followed was flawless. Rebecca guided the investors through TechFlow's artificial intelligence platform with the kind of confident expertise that had made her reputation in the tech industry. But her mind kept drifting to the man who had made it all possible. Every slide that displayed perfectly, every demonstration that ran without glitches, every impressed nod from the venture capitalist served as a reminder that David Martinez had accomplished something her entire technical team couldn't manage. By the end of the evening, Harrison Mills was discussing investment timelines and partnership opportunities with the enthusiasm that Rebecca had hoped for but hadn't dared to expect after the initial disaster. The other investors were asking detailed questions about implementation strategies and market penetration that indicated genuine interest in TechFlow's potential. What should have been a catastrophic failure had transformed into one of the most successful presentations of Rebecca's career. But as she shook hands with departing investors and accepted congratulations from her relieved staff members, Rebecca found herself thinking about the quiet dignity with which David had approached their crisis. He hadn't sought credit or recognition for his intervention. He hadn't lingered to enjoy the gratitude that his technical rescue had earned. He had simply solved their problem and disappeared back into the invisible world of building maintenance as if saving million-dollar business deals was just another routine task. The contrast between David's expertise and his occupation troubled Rebecca in ways she couldn't immediately articulate. She had built her career in an industry that claimed to value talent and innovation above all else. Yet someone with obvious technical brilliance was working as a janitor in the building that housed dozens of technology companies. The contradiction suggested systemic failures that went beyond individual circumstances. Over the following days, Rebecca found herself paying attention to details of building operations that she had never noticed before. She observed the maintenance staff with new awareness, wondering what other hidden talents and untold stories moved through TechFlow's offices each evening after the executives and engineers had gone home. The building's cleaning crew worked with quiet efficiency, maintaining the professional environment that allowed her company to function, but she realized she had never considered them as individuals with their own expertise and aspirations. David's shift began at 6 in the evening, after most of TechFlow's employees had finished their workday. Rebecca started staying late more frequently, ostensibly to catch up on administrative tasks, but actually hoping for another encounter with the man who had rescued her presentation. She wanted to understand how someone with his technical knowledge had ended up working in building maintenance, and whether there might be opportunities to utilize his skills more appropriately. When she finally encountered David again, he was replacing burned-out fluorescent bulbs in the hallway outside her office. He worked methodically, testing each new bulb before moving to the next fixture, his attention focused on ensuring that every detail of his work met professional standards. The care he took with such routine tasks suggested the same precision that had characterized his approach to their computer crisis. "Mr. Martinez," Rebecca said, emerging from her office with what she hoped was casual friendliness rather than executive curiosity. "I wanted to thank you again for your help the other night. You saved my company." David looked down from the stepladder he was using, his expression pleasant but reserved. "Just glad I could help. Technical problems happen to everyone." The modest response was characteristic of what Rebecca had observed about David's personality, but it also deflected the deeper questions she wanted to explore. She had spent considerable time thinking about their brief interaction, and she was increasingly convinced that David's background included experiences that had prepared him for far more complex challenges than changing light bulbs. "You mentioned that you used to work in software development," Rebecca continued, hoping to encourage him to share more details about his background. "What led you to building maintenance?" The question seemed to create a subtle shift in David's demeanor. His hands continued working with the light fixtures, but Rebecca sensed that he was choosing his words carefully before responding. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested complicated history behind his career transition. "Sometimes life takes you in directions you don't expect," he said simply. "I needed work that let me be home with my daughter in the evenings and weekends. Building maintenance offers that kind of schedule flexibility." The mention of his daughter added a personal dimension to David's story that Rebecca hadn't considered. She realized that her assumptions about career advancement and professional ambition might not account for the complexities of single parenthood and family responsibilities. Someone with David's technical skills might have deliberately chosen a less demanding job to prioritize his role as a father. "How old is your daughter?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious about the family circumstances that had influenced David's professional choices. "Emma's 12, David replied, and for the first time since their conversation began, his reserved expression softened into something approaching warmth. "She's in 7th grade at Lincoln Elementary. Brilliant kid, much smarter than her old man." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and Rebecca found herself reassessing her understanding of success and professional fulfillment. David might have sacrificed career advancement for the opportunity to be present in his daughter's life, choosing stability and availability over prestigious positions and higher salaries. The decision suggested values that were both admirable and challenging to conventional notions of professional achievement. She must appreciate having a father who's available for school events and homework help, Rebecca observed, thinking about her own childhood with parents who had worked multiple jobs to provide financial security, but had rarely been available for the small daily interactions that built relationships. "We make it work," David said with the kind of understated confidence that suggested he had found satisfaction in his choices. despite any professional sacrifices they required. Emma's got big dreams for her future. Wants to be an engineer, maybe work for NASA someday. I figure my job is to make sure she has every opportunity to pursue whatever makes her happy. The conversation revealed a perspective on parenting and career priorities that Rebecca had rarely encountered in her professional circles. Most of the executives and entrepreneurs she knew treated family responsibilities as obstacles to be managed rather than as central organizing principles for their life decisions. David's willingness to subordinate his career ambitions to his daughter's needs suggested a different set of values entirely. As their conversation continued, Rebecca learned that David spent his weekends helping Emma with science fair projects and attending her soccer games. He volunteered at the community center where Emma participated in after-school programs, and he had taught himself enough about middle school mathematics to help her with homework assignments that challenged even his technical background. His evenings were devoted to cooking dinner, reviewing schoolwork, and maintaining the kind of stable routine that children needed to thrive. The picture that emerged was of someone who had deliberately structured his life around his responsibilities as a single parent, accepting professional limitations in exchange for the opportunity to be actively involved in his daughter's development. Rebecca found herself admiring David's priorities while also recognizing the waste of talent that his situation represented for the technology industry. "Have you ever considered returning to software development?" she asked, wondering whether TechFlow might benefit from David's expertise while also offering him opportunities for professional growth. David's response was measured and thoughtful, suggesting that he had considered the possibility but had reached conclusions that prioritized other concerns. "The industry has changed a lot since I stepped away. Most development positions require travel, overtime, weekend work. That's not compatible with raising a 12-year-old daughter on your own." The explanation made perfect sense from a practical standpoint, but it also highlighted systemic problems within the tech industry that Rebecca had never fully considered. Companies like TechFlow demanded extraordinary time commitments from their employees, creating work environments that were incompatible with many forms of family responsibility. Talented professionals like David were effectively excluded from career opportunities because the industry refused to accommodate the realities of modern parenthood. Rebecca found herself thinking about TechFlow's own policies and expectations, recognizing that her company contributed to the same problems that had pushed David toward building maintenance. They offered generous salaries and impressive benefits packages, but they also expected employees to prioritize work above all other considerations. The culture rewarded people who could devote unlimited time and energy to professional challenges while providing little support for those with competing obligations. What if there were software development positions that offered regular hours and reliable schedules? Rebecca asked, her curiosity now extending beyond David's personal situation to broader questions about talent retention and inclusive employment practices. David's smile suggested that he appreciated her interest, but remained skeptical about the practical possibilities. "That would be ideal, but I've never encountered a tech company that operated that way. The industry runs on the assumption that innovation requires total commitment." The conversation was interrupted by David's radio, crackling with a request from building security about a maintenance issue on another floor. He apologized for having to cut their discussion short, but Rebecca was grateful for the interruption because it gave her time to process the implications of what she had learned. David Martinez represented exactly the kind of talent that TechFlow needed to compete in an increasingly complex technology marketplace, but his expertise was inaccessible because of employment practices that failed to account for diverse life circumstances. His technical knowledge was being wasted on tasks that anyone could perform, while her company struggled to find qualified candidates for positions that required exactly his skills and experience. Over the following weeks, Rebecca found herself observing TechFlow's operations with new awareness of the hidden costs of their demanding work culture. Several valuable employees had left the company in recent months, citing family obligations and work-life balance concerns that the management team had dismissed as personal problems rather than systematic issues. She began to recognize patterns of talent loss that might be addressed through more flexible employment policies. The success of her presentation to the investors had secured TechFlow's financial future, but her encounters with David had introduced questions about the company's human resources practices that seemed equally important for long-term sustainability. Rebecca realized that her industry's approach to talent management might be systematically excluding people whose contributions could drive innovation in unexpected directions. She began researching alternative employment models that might allow TechFlow to access broader pools of talent while also supporting employees with diverse personal circumstances. The possibilities were intriguing, but implementing changes would require convincing her board of directors and senior management team that flexibility could enhance rather than compromise their competitive position. Rebecca's growing interest in David's situation reflected broader concerns about social responsibility and corporate citizenship that had been developing throughout her career. She had always focused primarily on business growth and technological innovation, but her recent experiences suggested that sustainable success required attention to human factors that traditional business metrics failed to capture. The challenge was finding ways to translate her new awareness into concrete policies that could benefit people like David while also advancing TechFlow's strategic objectives. Rebecca suspected that the solution would require creativity and persistence, but she was beginning to believe that the effort would be worthwhile for both practical and ethical reasons that extended far beyond any single employee's circumstances. 3 weeks after the investor presentation, Rebecca made a decision that shocked her executive team and raised eyebrows. Throughout the Millennium Business Tower, she offered David Martinez a position as senior systems consultant with TechFlow. Innovations complete with flexible scheduling that would allow him to maintain his responsibilities as a single father while utilizing his considerable technical expertise in meaningful ways. The reaction from her board of directors was swift and skeptical. Lisa Park, the board member who had consistently questioned Rebecca's leadership decisions, was particularly vocal in her opposition to what she characterized as an impulsive hiring choice based on insufficient vetting and inappropriate personal involvement in employee recruitment. The fact that Rebecca was offering a substantial salary increase and unprecedented scheduling flexibility to someone who worked in building maintenance struck many board members as evidence of poor judgment and questionable business priorities. "You're proposing to hire a janitor for a senior technical position based on a single incident of computer troubleshooting," Lisa Park observed during the emergency board meeting that Rebecca had been required to call to justify her decision. "This sets a dangerous precedent for our hiring standards and undermines the credibility of our technical team." The criticism stung because it contained elements of truth that Rebecca couldn't entirely dismiss. Her interest in David Martinez had begun with his technical intervention during the investor presentation, but it had evolved into something more complex that included admiration for his values and curiosity about his background. She was offering him opportunities that other qualified candidates might deserve, and her personal investment in his success could be seen as favoritism rather than sound business judgment. But Rebecca had also conducted extensive research into David's professional history, discovering details about his background that validated her instincts about his capabilities. Before becoming a single father, David had worked as a senior developer for a financial services company where he had designed security protocols that were still being used 5 years after his departure. His references spoke enthusiastically about his technical innovation and problem-solving abilities, describing him as one of the most talented programmers they had encountered. The reason for David's career transition was both heartbreaking and illuminating. His wife had died in a car accident when Emma was 7 years old, leaving him to navigate single parenthood without family support or adequate financial resources. The demanding schedule and frequent travel requirements of his development position had become incompatible with his responsibilities as Emma's sole caregiver, forcing him to choose between career advancement and his daughter's well-being. He had taken the building maintenance job because it offered stable hours, reliable income, and the flexibility to be present for Emma's school events and medical appointments. The position utilized none of his technical training, but it allowed him to fulfill his obligations as a father while maintaining their modest apartment in Pilsen and ensuring that Emma had access to educational opportunities that could support her own aspirations. Rebecca's research had also revealed that David had continued developing his technical skills during his years in building maintenance, taking online courses and obtaining certifications that kept his knowledge current with industry developments. He had created several small applications for the community center where Emma participated in after-school programs, demonstrating that his programming abilities remained sharp despite his current occupation. The information painted a picture of someone who had made enormous personal sacrifices to prioritize his daughter's needs, but who retained both the expertise and the passion for technology that could benefit TechFlow's development efforts. Rebecca believed that offering David an opportunity to return to software development with scheduling accommodations that supported his family responsibilities was both ethical and strategically sound. Her proposal included provisions that would allow David to work primarily during school hours, with occasional evening meetings scheduled well in advance to ensure adequate childcare arrangements. The position would focus on security analysis and system optimization, areas where his expertise would be immediately valuable and where the work could be accomplished with minimal travel or unpredictable overtime requirements. The board's resistance to her proposal forced Rebecca to examine her own motivations and consider whether she was allowing personal feelings to influence professional decisions in inappropriate ways. Her interest in David's situation certainly included admiration for his character and curiosity about his background, but she was convinced that hiring him represented sound business judgment rather than misplaced charity or romantic attraction. Lisa Park's continued opposition to the hiring decision created tension that extended beyond David's specific situation to broader questions about Rebecca's leadership style and strategic vision. The board member had been accumulating support for her position that TechFlow needed more experienced management to navigate the competitive challenges facing technology companies, and Rebecca's unconventional hiring proposal provided ammunition for those arguments. This decision reflects a pattern of impulsive judgment that concerns several board members. Lisa announced during a particularly contentious discussion about David's employment offer, "We need leadership that makes decisions based on established business practices rather than personal preferences or social causes." The accusation that Rebecca was treating David's hiring as a social cause rather than a business decision was particularly frustrating because it mischaracterized both her motivations and the practical benefits that his expertise could provide to TechFlow's operations. But defending her position required revealing details about David's background that felt like violations of his privacy, and she was reluctant to share personal information that he had trusted her with during their private conversations. The conflict with her board forced Rebecca to recognize how little support she had developed among the people whose approval was essential for her continued leadership of the company she had founded. Her focus on technical innovation and business growth had left her vulnerable to political challenges from board members who questioned her judgment and authority, particularly when her decisions diverged from conventional business practices. Meanwhile, David himself remained largely unaware of the corporate controversy surrounding Rebecca's employment offer. She had presented the opportunity to him during one of their evening conversations, explaining that TechFlow could benefit from his security expertise while offering him the schedule flexibility that his family situation required. His initial reaction had been skeptical, reflecting years of experience with job opportunities that promised more than they could deliver. "Are you sure this isn't charity?" David had asked with the direct honesty that characterized all of his interactions with Rebecca. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't want to accept a position I haven't earned or that puts you in a difficult situation with your colleagues." The question revealed David's awareness of the unusual circumstances surrounding Rebecca's offer, as well as his reluctance to accept opportunities that might be motivated by pity rather than genuine recognition of his capabilities. His pride and integrity were evident in his concern about earning his position through merit rather than receiving it as a favor. But his caution also reflected realistic assessment of the challenges facing someone trying to re-enter the technology industry after years in a different field. Rebecca had assured him that her offer was based entirely on his technical qualifications and the value he could provide to TechFlow's development efforts. She had shown him examples of security vulnerabilities in their current systems that his expertise could address, and she had outlined specific projects where his background would be immediately applicable. The conversation had convinced David that the opportunity was legitimate, but he had requested time to consider how the career change might affect Emma's routine and stability. The decision ultimately came down to David's assessment of what would be best for his daughter's future. Emma was approaching high school age, and the increased salary from a technical position would allow them to move to a better neighborhood, with stronger schools and more educational opportunities. The work schedule that Rebecca had proposed would still allow him to be present for Emma's important events while providing financial security that building maintenance could never offer. After a week of careful consideration and several conversations with Emma about how the change might affect their lives, David accepted Rebecca's offer. His decision was motivated primarily by the opportunities it would create for his daughter, but he was also excited about the chance to return to work that utilized his technical training and satisfied his intellectual curiosity about complex programming challenges. The announcement of David's hiring generated mixed reactions throughout TechFlow's offices. Some employees were curious about the new colleague who had been recruited under unusual circumstances, while others questioned whether his technical skills would be adequate for the demands of modern software development. The fact that he had been working in building maintenance for several years created skepticism about his ability to contribute meaningfully to sophisticated programming projects. Rebecca scheduled David's first day to coincide with a department meeting, where she could introduce him to the technical team and outline his initial responsibilities. She was aware that his success would depend partly on his colleagues' willingness to accept him as a legitimate member of their professional community, rather than as an oddity or charity case who had been imposed on them by executive decree. David approached his transition to TechFlow with the same methodical preparation that had characterized his approach to every challenge Rebecca had observed him tackle. He spent his final weeks in building maintenance studying TechFlow's existing systems and familiarizing himself with the programming languages and development tools that the company used for their current projects. His dedication to preparation was evident in the detailed questions he asked about coding standards and project management procedures. On his first day as senior systems consultant, David arrived wearing a business casual outfit that transformed his appearance while maintaining the understated professionalism that had impressed Rebecca during their previous interactions. He carried a leather portfolio that contained notebooks filled with his analysis of TechFlow's security vulnerabilities and suggestions for systematic improvements that could enhance both performance and protection against intrusion attempts. The technical team's initial skepticism began to dissolve within hours of David's first contributions to their ongoing projects. His insights into system optimization were immediately valuable, and his approach to problem-solving demonstrated both the theoretical knowledge and practical experience that came from years of working with complex programming challenges. By the end of his first week, even his most skeptical colleagues were acknowledging that Rebecca's unconventional hiring decision had brought genuine expertise to their development efforts. But David's integration into TechFlow's corporate culture revealed tensions that extended beyond his technical qualifications to broader questions about workplace expectations and professional identity. His insistence on leaving precisely at school dismissal time, regardless of project deadlines or meeting schedules, challenged assumptions about dedication and commitment that were deeply embedded in the company's operational culture. The conflict between David's family priorities and TechFlow's demanding work environment came to a head during his third week when a critical system failure occurred, just as he was preparing to leave for Emma's parent-teacher conference. Rest of the technical team assumed he would stay to help resolve the emergency, but David quietly gathered his belongings and explained that he had commitments that couldn't be rescheduled. His departure during the crisis created resentment among colleagues, who had canceled their own evening plans to address the technical problems, and it raised questions about whether someone with such inflexible scheduling constraints could truly be considered a team player in an industry that prized availability and responsiveness above all other considerations. The crisis that tested David's place at TechFlow came exactly 1 month after his hiring, during what should have been a routine system update that instead triggered a cascade of failures across their entire client database. The timing couldn't have been worse, occurring at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, when most of the development team was already mentally preparing for the weekend and David was gathering his materials to leave for Emma's science fair presentation at Lincoln Elementary. Marcus Thompson discovered the problem first, watching in horror as client accounts began displaying corrupted data and automated systems started generating thousands of error reports. The malfunction threatened to disrupt service for over 50,000 users across multiple time zones, potentially destroying relationships that TechFlow had spent years building and costing the company millions in lost revenue and damaged reputation. "We need everyone on this immediately," Tom Rodriguez announced to the assembled technical staff, his voice carrying the kind of controlled panic that Rebecca had learned to associate with genuine emergencies. "This is exactly the kind of situation that can kill a company if we don't resolve it quickly." The expectation that David would cancel his personal plans to help address the crisis was so automatic that several colleagues were already explaining technical details to him before they noticed he was putting on his jacket and checking his watch. When Tom Rodriguez realized that David intended to leave despite the emergency, his expression shifted from surprise to anger to something approaching betrayal. "You can't be serious about leaving now," Tom said, his voice loud enough to draw attention from across the office. "We're looking at a potential catastrophe that could destroy everything this company has built, and you're worried about a school event?" The confrontation crystallized tensions that had been building since David's arrival at TechFlow, forcing everyone present to choose sides in a conflict that represented competing visions of professional responsibility and personal priorities. Rebecca watched from her office doorway as the technical team waited for David's response, knowing that his decision would determine not only his future with the company, but also the precedent for work-life balance expectations that would affect every employee. David's reply was measured and calm, delivered without defensiveness or apology, but with the quiet conviction of someone who had thought carefully about his priorities and wasn't willing to compromise them even under extreme pressure. "I understand. This is important, and I'll be available remotely if you need consultation on specific technical issues. But I promised my daughter I would be at her science fair, and that's a commitment I won't break." The response sparked immediate controversy among his colleagues, with some expressing outrage at what they saw as selfish prioritization of personal interests over collective responsibility, while others admired his integrity and questioned whether the company's crisis management should depend on employees sacrificing family obligations. without adequate notice or compensation. This is exactly why hiring someone with divided loyalties was a mistake, Lisa Park observed to Rebecca during the heated discussion that followed David's departure. Professional success requires total commitment, not part-time dedication from people who treat work as secondary to their personal lives. But Rebecca found herself thinking about the broader implications of the conflict, recognizing that TechFlow's expectation of unlimited availability from its employees created systemic problems that extended far beyond David's specific situation. The company culture that demanded immediate response to every crisis, regardless of personal circumstances or advance planning, was precisely the kind of environment that had forced David into building maintenance and that continued to exclude talented professionals who couldn't or wouldn't sacrifice their family responsibilities for corporate emergencies. The technical team worked through the evening to resolve the database crisis, eventually discovering that the problem stemmed from poorly tested code that should have been caught during their quality assurance procedures rather than deployed to production systems. The emergency could have been prevented through better planning and more rigorous testing protocols, suggesting that the real issue wasn't employee availability during crises, but rather the systematic failures that created unnecessary emergencies. David's remote consultation proved valuable throughout the evening, as his security expertise helped identify vulnerabilities that had contributed to the system failures, and his suggestions for database optimization reduced the time required to restore normal operations. His contributions were acknowledged by the technical team, but his physical absence during the crisis remained a source of resentment that affected his relationships with several colleagues. Over the weekend, Rebecca received calls from multiple board members expressing concern about David's commitment to the company and suggesting that his employment might need to be reconsidered if he couldn't adapt to the demands of software development work. The pressure to terminate David's position was intense and came from people who support Rebecca needed to maintain her own leadership role at TechFlow. But Rebecca's weekend was also filled with research into alternative management approaches that might allow TechFlow to retain talented employees like David while also maintaining the responsiveness and innovation that had made the company successful. She discovered that several progressive technology companies had implemented flexible scheduling and emergency response policies that distributed crisis management responsibilities across larger teams, reducing the burden on individual employees while improving overall system reliability. The most compelling examples came from companies that had recognized the competitive advantage of accessing broader talent pools by accommodating diverse life circumstances and work style preferences. These organizations had discovered that employees with strong boundaries around personal time often demonstrated superior focus and productivity during working hours, while their diverse perspectives and problem-solving approaches enhanced creative collaboration and technical innovation. Rebecca's research convinced her that TechFlow's traditional approach to employee management was not only ethically problematic, but also strategically limiting. The company was systematically excluding talented professionals whose contributions could drive innovation and growth, while the demanding work culture was creating burnout and turnover that undermined long-term sustainability and competitive positioning. On Monday morning, Rebecca called a meeting with her senior management team to discuss implementing new policies that would support work-life integration while maintaining TechFlow's operational effectiveness. Her proposal included distributed emergency response protocols, improved project planning procedures, and flexible scheduling options that would allow the company to attract and retain diverse talent without compromising their ability to serve clients effectively. The reaction from her management team was predictably mixed, with some executives expressing enthusiasm for policies that could improve employee satisfaction and retention, while others worried about the practical challenges of implementing flexible schedules and the potential impact on company culture and client relationships. Tom Rodriguez was particularly concerned about the precedent that accommodating David's scheduling constraints might establish for other employees. If we allow one person to refuse overtime and emergency assignments, how do we maintain standards for everyone else? What happens when multiple employees start demanding similar accommodations? The question highlighted legitimate operational concerns, but Rebecca had developed responses based on her research into companies that had successfully implemented flexible management approaches. The key was creating systematic policies that distributed responsibilities equitably rather than depending on individual employees to be available for unlimited demands, while also establishing clear expectations and accountability measures that ensured essential work was completed effectively. Her proposal included rotation schedules for emergency response duties, improved documentation and knowledge-sharing procedures that reduced dependence on specific individuals, and project management protocols that provided adequate advance notice for activities requiring extended hours or weekend work. The changes would require initial investment in training and system development, but they would ultimately create more sustainable and resilient operations. The discussion with her management team revealed the depth of cultural change that would be required to implement Rebecca's vision of a more inclusive and sustainable work environment. Many of the executives had built their careers in traditional technology companies, where long hours and constant availability were treated as indicators of dedication and professional competence, making them skeptical about approaches that prioritized work-life balance. But Rebecca's research had also revealed the competitive advantages that progressive employment policies could provide in attracting top talent and reducing turnover costs. The most successful technology companies were increasingly those that could access diverse talent pools and maintain stable, experienced teams rather than those that burned through employees with unsustainable demands and expectations. The conversation about David's future at TechFlow ultimately became a broader discussion about the kind of company Rebecca wanted TechFlow to become and the values that would guide their growth and development. She realized that her decision about accommodating David's scheduling needs would establish precedents that would affect every future hiring decision and define the company culture for years to come. Rebecca's final decision was influenced by a conversation with Emma Martinez, whom she encountered at the community center where TechFlow had begun sponsoring educational programs for local students. Emma was working on a robotics project with the kind of focused intensity that reminded Rebecca of her own childhood fascination with technology. But what struck her most was the 12-year-old's articulate discussion of her father's work and her appreciation for the opportunities his new position had created. "My dad is really good at fixing computers," Emma explained with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who had watched her father solve complex technical problems throughout her childhood. "He used to help all the teachers at my old school when their computers broke, even though that wasn't his job. Now he gets to do that kind of work all the time, and he still comes to my soccer games and helps with my homework." The conversation revealed the broader impact of Rebecca's hiring decision, extending beyond David's professional development to affect his daughter's educational opportunities and future aspirations. Emma's pride in her father's technical expertise and her understanding of the sacrifices he had made for her well-being provided perspective on the family dynamics that informed David's professional choices. Rebecca realized that accommodating David's scheduling constraints wasn't just about employment policy or workplace flexibility. It was about recognizing the value of employees who brought diverse perspectives and life experiences to their work, and creating organizational structures that could benefit from those differences rather than demanding conformity to narrow definitions of professional dedication. The following week, Rebecca announced new policies that would allow TechFlow to maintain operational effectiveness while supporting employees with various personal commitments and work-style preferences. The changes included distributed emergency response responsibilities, improved project planning procedures, flexible scheduling options, and enhanced documentation systems that reduce dependence on individual availability during crises. David's position was not only preserved but expanded to include leadership responsibilities for implementing the new emergency response protocols and training other team members in security procedures that could prevent many of the crises that had previously required immediate overtime work. His expertise in system optimization and his experience with sustainable work practices made him ideal for developing procedures that would improve both operational efficiency and employee satisfaction. The transformation wasn't immediate or without challenges. Some employees struggled to adapt to new expectations about advanced planning and shared responsibilities, while others embraced the opportunities for better work-life integration and professional development. But over the following months, TechFlow's employee satisfaction scores improved dramatically, while their client service quality remained consistently high. Rebecca's decision to support David's integration into TechFlow's technical team ultimately established the company as a leader in progressive employment practices within the technology industry. Their reputation for accommodating diverse talent and supporting work-life balance attracted exceptional candidates who might have been excluded from more traditional corporate environments, while their innovative approaches to distributed responsibility and sustainable operations improved both productivity and employee retention. The success of TechFlow's new policies attracted attention from other technology companies seeking to address their own challenges with talent acquisition and employee burnout. Rebecca found herself speaking at industry conferences about the business advantages of inclusive employment practices and the competitive benefits of accessing broader talent pools through flexible management approaches. David's story became a symbol of the hidden potential that existed throughout the technology industry among professionals whose circumstances had forced them into positions that didn't utilize their full capabilities. His successful transition from building maintenance to senior technical consultant demonstrated that talent and expertise could be found in unexpected places, and that companies willing to accommodate diverse life circumstances could access valuable resources that their competitors overlooked. 6 months after David's hiring, TechFlow announced its most successful quarter in company history, with client satisfaction scores reaching record highs and employee turnover dropping to industry-leading lows. The combination of technical innovation and progressive management practices had created a sustainable competitive advantage that attracted both top talent and loyal clients. Rebecca's leadership during the transition established her reputation as a visionary executive who could balance business objectives with social responsibility, while David's contributions to system security and operational efficiency demonstrated the practical benefits of inclusive hiring practices. Their collaboration had transformed not only their individual careers, but also the organizational culture that would guide TechFlow's continued growth and success. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.